And good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in. News Talk 95.3, Michiana's news channel. I am your host, Casey Hendrickson. Want to thank R&B Car Company, locations in South Bend and Warsaw. R&B Car Company are your used car experts. Find them online at rbcarcompany.com. All right, I wanted to go over some statistics here because this is obviously going to be very important when you head into the election. This is becoming an issue, and it is polling now. It's something that hasn't been polling but is now polling. Near majority of registered U.S. voters say that the recent Black Lives Matter associated protests across the country have been primarily violent demonstrations, according to a new Rasmussen Just the News daily poll. When asked, 48% of voters said that the protests have been primarily violent protests. I mean, that's staggering, okay? Now, again, this is an issue that is polling, and this favors Trump heavily. People are now really upset that the violence is continuing, that the rioting is continuing. Protests are one thing. You start burning down communities, people start to get really, really upset about that. So now you've got nearly half, 48% of voters, again, these are voters, these are not just people, who said that the protests have been primarily violent riots. That's huge. Now, a study says that approximately 7% of demonstrations linked to the Black Lives Matter movement between May 24th and August 22nd in the U.S. involved violence. Now, this is research according to U.S. Crisis Monitor, which is a joint project between the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. So this is a big deal. Now, that's 7%, so some of you go see 93% of the protests are peaceful according to this data. But that's hundreds of demonstrations that were violent. And remember, what the data shows isn't necessarily what voters see and hear, because then you start running into issues with 48% of voters saying that the majority of the protests have been violent. So perception becomes reality when you get to an election, and that's what you have to look out for. So you start running into these issues. Who knows how that's going to impact the general election, how that's going to swing, but right now that all appears to be favoring President Trump. So, ladies and gentlemen, joining me right now is Special Assistant to the President and the Deputy Press Secretary of the White House, Brian Morgenstern. Brian, how are you doing today?
Hey, Casey, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Well, we appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, but thank you so much for coming on here. And there's really a few topics that I wanted to hit with you. And I was just going over some of the stats about protests, violence, reopening the country, and things like that. Let's just start with the protests. Let's start with mayors fleeing their own neighborhoods, fleeing their own houses after the protesters that they supported have now turned on them and have now started attacking their houses. And they're still not accepting help from the president. Why is that?
Well, I hesitate to try to speak for somebody who doesn't appear to be behaving very rationally, but I think that we're looking at Biden supporters in Biden supporter-run cities that seem to be trying to placate anarchists and rioters. And that's really, it's unacceptable. The president doesn't accept it. That's why he has continually offered law enforcement support and federal resources, the National Guard if necessary, to restore law and order in the streets. Because you cannot have prosperity without security. We need security so that people can go about their daily lives. We can safely reopen our country. People can get back to doing business. They can go to church. They can go to school. We still have to be safe. The coronavirus is a serious issue, of course, we know. But people need to be able to live their lives and earn a living and get back to whatever we can do in a safe way. This rioting, the anarchy, is destroying people's livelihoods and their ability really to just interact with their friends, their neighbors, their family members. It's not acceptable. The president wants safety in our streets, and that's why he will continue to speak out on this issue very forcefully, even though the Democrats really have not been. Now all of a sudden they want to decry the violence and somehow turn common sense on its head and blame President Trump for the very thing that he's been standing up against. But that's obviously too little too late. So the president's been a leader on this issue, and he will continue to be.
Yeah, I like playing the montage of all of the Democrats and members of the media who called for violence over these past several months and suddenly pretending that it's all the president's fault for all of this when he's been calling for calm. Let's talk a little bit about that economic impact, Brian, because I believe it's the 41st time now Democrats have blocked an additional COVID-19 relief package using the filibuster as a way to do that. It's the filibuster is what's weird about this is that the Democrats are actively campaigning on getting rid of the filibuster. Former President Obama back in July said that it was an archaic law from Jim Crow. So why are they continuing to use this to prevent relief from getting to the American people with this extra relief package?
Oh, it's outrageous. They apparently have made the political calculation that it's better for them in the election if the American people don't get the support that they need. And that's really, that's just a shame. I mean, that's really awful because the president's here ready to lead. He has signed his executive orders, obviously, providing an eviction moratorium that led to the eviction moratorium with the advice of the CDC. He signed his order on student loan relief, on payroll tax relief, on enhanced unemployment insurance. Now, what the Senate Republicans were proposing, of course, is helping employees stay connected to their jobs at small businesses, which employ half of our country's workforce, and enhanced unemployment insurance for people who are displaced from their jobs through no fault of their own because of a global pandemic that originated from China that was very difficult for us to learn about because of the Communist Party of China. This is no fault of their own. The Republicans are offering a common sense path forward here that would provide people the support they need to get to the other side of this. And the fact that the Democrats are holding it up for political purposes is really unacceptable. The president will continue to look at whatever he can do from the executive branch side of things, but still hopeful that the Democrats will put politics aside, as we did for the first several packages, the first several relief packages, when we had bipartisan consensus. People still need support. What has changed? Not the fact that, conditions have improved, certainly. Our economic conditions have improved. But really what's changed is we've got closer to an election. And that is the main factor that seems to be motivating the Democrats. And that's really unfortunate. The Republicans are trying to provide relief that is much needed right now.
Now, I don't know how deep into election politics you really want to dive because of your position in the White House. It doesn't seem like you're shying away from it, but we cover Michigan and Indiana on this program, and we've got Governor Whitmer in Michigan. She goes on CNN here this week, and she is deeply concerned, she says, about Trump rallies in Michigan. But she's totally okay with Biden rallies in Michigan. And we've seen that consistently from a lot of governors and politicians really kind of throughout, and this Woodward stuff and people pretending that they were calling for the virus to be taken seriously when obviously the president took the virus seriously months before anybody wanted to act. It's kind of this surreal existence that we have, that you have all of these people rewriting history and pretending that protests and riots for a political cause will spread the virus, but the opposite political cause won't spread the virus at all. How's that being read inside the White House and inside the Beltway?
I mean, the ultimate hypocrisy. I think it's being read the same way that all Americans who actually have common sense, which is unfortunately uncommon in Washington, D.C. and in politics sometimes more generally. But if you can protest, you can go to church. If you can protest, you can vote in person. If you can protest, you can go to work. If you can protest, you can go to school. We just have to do it safely. We have to do it using social distancing and wearing masks and washing hands and protecting vulnerable populations. Because over the past several months, we have learned so much about this virus and how to mitigate its spread and about how to treat people who are infected and how to reduce hospitalization rates and mortality rates. And it's thanks to the president's leadership with the whole of government approach, the whole of America approach, using the administration, state and local leaders, the scientific community, really getting everyone involved and availing ourselves of the best expertise in the world to help our country get through this. We know what to do. Using safe, common sense mitigation measures, we can get through this all together. But when you try to stifle your political opponents using public health as a cover, I mean, that's really despicable. That's an awful thing to do. The president wants everyone to be able to go about their daily lives as safely as possible while still taking this issue very seriously. The coronavirus is a serious issue. He has taken it seriously, obviously, as you just said, for many months. But we all need to be in this together consistently. It's not about politics. It's about saving lives, and it's about getting back to our daily lives as best we can.
When you have local health officials like we have had here in St. Joseph County, Indiana, they've been running this entire pandemic, Brian, and they've been saying, we will listen to the CDC, we will listen to the WHO. You've already addressed China lied. WHO is now admitted to lying or deceiving for several months after the virus. But when local health officials say that they're going to listen to the CDC, but the CDC, based on this new data that keeps coming out, is adjusting their guidelines. And then you have local health officials like what we had in St. Joseph County here say, we're no longer seeing the CDC as credible. We think their guidelines are not accurate and we're not going to follow them. How does that get back to the president in his briefings when he addresses this? And does he react to this in any way? Does anybody even tell him about this? Or is this just something that he figures is par for the course in a politicized society?
No, I mean, it's disappointing because the president has been guided by his public health experts. He listens to their advice. Sometimes the experts may have some shades of gray or differing opinions, and at some point the president needs to make a call, but in one way or another in terms of recommendations. But he's always led by the science and by what's going to save people's lives. And the CDC is it's career scientists. The president is not telling the CDC what to do. The CDC is making recommendations based on public health data and information. And so, these local health officials should continue to work with the CDC. They should continue to review those recommendations. They should continue to use them whenever feasible. The president is not making this about politics. Unfortunately, his opponents on the left and in the media are trying to politicize a public health issue as much as possible, but that's really a shame because the president's response and his reliance on public health experts is all about saving American lives.
I'm going to ask this question. I've for many months on my show, I've kind of said this, Brian, is that I think that a lot of what we hear from the press and from Democrats in particular and their allies about the virus is going to calm down and start to dwindle after November 4th. Do you believe that? Is the president of that opinion? And do you believe that as they politicize the virus, that Democrats, especially when they withhold aid packages 41 times and will continue to do so, do you think that they are putting people's lives in jeopardy by politicizing this pandemic?
Well, it's a serious question, and unfortunately, I think there are some who are politicizing this at the expense of public health, and that's really unfortunate. As I said, the president's response, the administration's response, the task force, which includes, by the way, the CDC director, among other public health experts, their number one priority is the health and safety of the American people. That there are people out there right now politicizing this event, and I'll give you one example, the vaccine. There are people who seem to be trying to undermine confidence in the process for developing the vaccine. That is despicable. This vaccine is being produced pursuant to every scientific guideline. There will be a thorough review by the FDA, and it will meet their gold-plated standards. There is an independent review board by outside scientists who will verify that everything is done very thoroughly, subject to thorough reviews, and that the safety and the efficacy of this product will be verified by everyone who needs to verify it. This is not driven by politics. So in the coming, weeks, we are in election season. Sometimes it seems more like silly season because of the hysteria that we're seeing on various issues, the Woodward book being Exhibit A. But we hope that common sense will prevail, and that the American people will see that the administration's response is led by science, and it is led by the desire to save lives, and it is led with advice from the best public health experts in the world.
It's kind of funny, the Woodward thing. To me, it just proves further that the president took this seriously before anybody else did. That happened on February 7th, and I counted 13 days in which the administration took action against the virus before that, going back to January, and 15 or 16 direct actions, including removing restrictions to push forward those vaccine developments. All of that happened before Woodward even sat down with him. Meanwhile, 3 or 4 weeks afterwards, Democrats were still telling you to go to Times Square, go to Chinatown, everything's fine, it's safe, the president's lying about the virus. It's kind of interesting that they're trying to hold that over his head now.
Yeah, Casey, and the other side that's now trying to rewrite history, at the time when the president announced the travel ban from China, he did the travel ban from Europe, trying to slow the spread of this disease and implementing all the very important measures that you just outlined. People were calling him a fearmongerer when he was trying to project calm while pursuing all these very important steps to ensure public safety. He was also projecting calm and encouraging everyone to, we're in it together. We need to overcome this, being rational and calm and doing everything we can to protect each other. People were accusing him of being a fearmongerer. Now, in retrospect, they're trying to rewrite history and say that he wasn't being a fearmongerer enough. Well, okay, right. You can't have it both ways, I think that it's safe to say that all of us is involved in the administration's response, the president at the forefront. We're acting in good faith with the information that we had at the time. It was ever evolving. And mobilizing the federal government in the most comprehensive effort, national effort, that we have seen since World War II to save lives. So this revisionist history is really disgraceful, but the president has been a leader for the country, briefing the country on a regular basis on our efforts, and I think the American people know that he has been a strong leader on this.
Brian, is there anything that you wanted to mention to the public before I let you go today?
Well, just that the president has reiterated over the recent days, this is not about politics. This is about saving lives. It seems to be the other side trying to politicize these very important issues, but the president is going to continue to keep the health and the safety of the American people at the forefront of his mind, and safely reopening our country so that we can get jobs, higher wages, more opportunities for the American people. We can get back to that prosperous economy, along with a safer, more secure country at the other side of this pandemic. Thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Brian Morgenstern, Special Assistant to the President, White House Deputy Press Secretary. Tell the Vice President we miss talking to him, please.
I certainly will. I'll pass it along.
Thank you very much. Again, Brian Morgenstern from the White House joining us, talking about the virus, reopening, violence in the streets, and a lot more. We covered a lot of ground there, so I want to thank his time. It's not easy to get somebody from the White House on your show these days, but we do appreciate it. We got more coming up. News Talk 95.3, Michiana's news channel.